The fog-shrouded streets of New York in December 1885 gleamed under the gas lamps, as horse-drawn carriages lined Fifth Avenue outside the opulent mansion of the Vanderbilts' Grand Holiday Ball. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast dazzling light on swirling gowns and tuxedos, but for Miss Eleanor Harrington, tall and graceful, her dark hair elegantly pinned beneath a pearl tiara, her expression a mix of quiet composure and hidden weariness in her emerald silk dress, she felt only suffocation. "Miss Harrington, you cannot possibly refuse me this waltz," drawled Mr. Reginald Blackstone, a portly railroad heir twice her age, his eyes gleaming with possessive intent as he cornered her near the orchestra. Eleanor's heart raced. With a whispered excuse about needing air, she slipped through the terrace doors, her cloak clutched tightly, and dashed down the steps into the night. Footsteps pursued her, Blackstone's voice echoing. In desperation, she yanked open the door of the nearest sleek black carriage and tumbled inside, slamming it shut behind her. The interior was luxuriously warm, scented with rosewater and fine leather. As her eyes adjusted, a bright, amused voice broke the silence. "Well, you're certainly not my usual companion for the ride home." Across from her sat a vivacious young lady with striking auburn curls framing a mischievous smile, dressed in deep burgundy velvet. "I'm Miss Victoria Langford," she said, leaning forward with sparkling eyes. "And you, I suspect, are escaping something, or someone, dreadful." Eleanor exhaled shakily, a reluctant smile forming. Little did she know this impulsive flight would entangle her in a web of sisterly scheming, forbidden love, and a connection that might just mend her guarded heart. The Langford carriage rolled smoothly through the snow-dusted streets of Manhattan, the clip-clop of hooves muffled by the fresh fall. Eleanor sat rigid at first, her gloved hands clasped tightly in her lap, still catching her breath from the chase. Across from her, Victoria Langford studied her new companion with open, unabashed curiosity, as though she had just discovered a rare and fascinating artifact. "You're trembling," Victoria observed gently, reaching to a small compartment beneath the seat. She produced a silver flask and offered it. "Brandy. Medicinal, I promise." Eleanor hesitated, then accepted. The liquor burned warmly down her throat, steadying her nerves. "Thank you. I fear I've imposed terribly." "Nonsense," Victoria said, waving a dismissive hand. "Any woman fleeing Reginald Blackstone deserves sanctuary. The man's persistence is legendary, and not in a flattering way." Her green eyes sparkled with mischief. "Tell me, how long has he been pursuing you?" "Since the season began," Eleanor replied, a weary smile touching her lips. "My father's fortune and my unfortunate unmarried state seem to have made me irresistible to him." Victoria laughed, a bright, infectious sound. "Poor darling. Well, you're safe now. My brother Alexander is still inside, enduring endless discussions about steel tariffs and railroad bonds. We won't depart for at least another quarter hour." Eleanor glanced out the frosted window. The Vanderbilt mansion glowed in the distance, and she could just make out Blackstone's bulky silhouette on the terrace, scanning the line of carriages. She shivered again. Victoria followed her gaze. "He won't find you here. This carriage bears no crest. Alexander prefers discretion." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "Now, while we wait, you must tell me your name. I can't keep thinking of you as the beautiful fugitive in emerald silk." "Eleanor Harrington," she answered, offering a small curtsy even seated. "Daughter of Theodore Harrington, of Harrington Shipping." Victoria's eyes widened in genuine delight. "Of course. Father knew your father. They served on the same charity board for the orphanage on Staten Island. This is Providence itself." She clasped her hands together. "I'm Victoria Langford, and my brother, whom you will doubtless hear far too much about, is Alexander Langford. Steel, bridges, and entirely too much responsibility." The name stirred recognition. Alexander Langford was one of the most elusive figures in New York society. 30 years old, heir to a fortune built on ironworks and innovative bridge construction, yet rarely seen at balls or operas. He attended only the most serious gatherings, lectures, historical society meetings, charitable planning sessions. Always alone, always departing early. Before Eleanor could respond, Victoria rapped sharply on the carriage roof. "Jenkins, we'll wait for Mr. Langford, but we have a guest. Miss Harrington will join us as far as her home on 62nd Street. The coachman's muffled acknowledgement came through the panel, and Victoria settled back with a satisfied smile. "There. Settled. And now, Miss Harrington, may I call you Eleanor? You must tell me what you truly enjoy when you're not dodging unwelcome suitors." The question, asked with such warmth and sincerity, caught Eleanor off guard. In drawing rooms across the city, conversation revolved around accomplishments suitable for a marriage resume: pianoforte, watercolor, embroidery, French conversation. No one ever asked what truly interested her. I read a great deal," she began hesitantly. "History, particularly the engineering feats of the past, Roman aqueducts, medieval cathedrals. And I've been assisting my father with correspondence regarding harbor improvements and shipping routes." Victoria's expression lit like a gas lamp turned high. "Engineering? Harbor improvements?" She leaned forward eagerly. "Eleanor, you are a marvel. Do you know my brother is obsessed with bridges? He spent years restoring the old family estate up the Hudson, stone by stone, beam by beam, while revolutionizing suspension designs for the new railways." Eleanor felt a flicker of genuine interest. Suspension bridges? Like Mr. Roebling's work on the Brooklyn Bridge. Exactly. Alexander corresponds with Roebling's engineers regularly. He's presented papers to the Historical Society on preserving historic structures while adapting them to modern needs. Victoria paused, her gaze turning thoughtful, almost calculating. "Eleanor, I hope you won't think me utterly forward, but I believe this chance meeting may be fate." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Fate." Victoria's words came in a rush, as though she'd been holding them back and could no longer contain them. "My brother needs someone in his life. Someone who challenges him, who shares his passions, who sees beyond the fortune and the factories. He's become so focused on duty, on protecting me, on expanding the business, that he's forgotten how to simply live." She took Eleanor's hand earnestly. "And I am in love. Desperately, completely in love with Mr. Julian Whitmore, an artist. Brilliant, kind, but considered unsuitable by Alexander because his family lost their fortune in the Panic of '73, and he earns his living painting rather than inheriting." Eleanor listened, astonished at the confidences pouring out from this near stranger. "Alexander refuses to even meet Julian properly," Victoria continued, frustration edging her voice. "He claims he's protecting me, but truly he's using me as an excuse to avoid his own happiness. If he had someone extraordinary like you, to occupy his thoughts, to remind him that life includes joy and connection, he might finally allow me mine." Eleanor withdrew her hand gently. "Miss Langford, Victoria, you're suggesting, what precisely?" "That you meet him. Properly. Not in some stifling ballroom where conversation is limited to the weather and mutual acquaintances. At the Historical Society lecture next week, on the preservation of industrial heritage. Alexander never misses it. And you, with your genuine interest in engineering and history, would be the perfect companion for discussion." Eleanor shook her head, a soft laugh escaping. "You've known me less than half an hour, and you're proposing I distract your brother so he'll approve your courtship?" Victoria grinned, unrepentant. "When you say it like that, it sounds quite mad. But think of it as mutual benefit. You escape the Blackstones of the world. I gain a chance at true love. And Alexander?" Her expression softened. "Alexander meets someone who might finally understand him." The carriage slowed, and through the window Eleanor recognized the familiar limestone facade of her family's townhouse on 62nd Street. Lantern lights spilled from the entrance where the footman waited. "I make no promises," Eleanor said carefully, gathering her cloak. "But I will consider the lecture. And I thank you truly for the rescue tonight." Victoria squeezed her hand once more. "I'll send an invitation tomorrow." "And Eleanor?" Her eyes gleamed with hope. "Thank you. For listening. For not thinking me completely outrageous." As Eleanor stepped down into the snow, the cold air sharp against her flushed cheeks, she watched the Langford carriage pull away into the night. The encounter should have felt absurd. A whirlwind of confidences from a stranger, a proposal bordering on conspiracy. Yet as she climbed the steps to her home, Reginald Blackstone's pursuit already fading into memory, Eleanor could not deny the spark of anticipation warming her chest. For the first time in years, someone had seen her, not as an heiress, not as a prize, but as a woman with a mind and passions of her own. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was a man who might value exactly that. 3 days later, a crisp winter sun glinted off the snow-covered rooftops of Fifth Avenue as Eleanor stepped down from her family's brougham in front of the imposing Langford mansion. The house was a masterpiece of restrained opulence. Pale limestone, tall arched windows, and ironwork balconies that spoke of both old money and modern precision. No ostentatious gilding here. Alexander Langford clearly preferred substance over show. A liveried footman ushered her through the double doors into a foyer warmed by a roaring fire. The air carried faint traces of cedar and beeswax. Before Eleanor could fully absorb the quiet elegance, Victoria appeared at the top of the marble staircase, radiant in a morning gown of soft rose wool. "Eleanor, you came," she called, hurrying down with unladylike enthusiasm and embracing her as though they were old friends. "I was half afraid you'd send your regrets and think me a complete lunatic." "I very nearly did," Eleanor admitted, allowing herself to be led into a sunlit morning room overlooking a small, snow-dusted garden. A tea service waited on a low mahogany table, steam curling from a silver pot beside plates of lemon biscuits and delicate sandwiches. "Your proposal was unconventional, to say the least." Victoria laughed, ringing for fresh hot water before settling opposite her guest. "Unconventional is my specialty. Conventional has left me engaged in a silent war with my brother for months." She poured tea with practiced grace, then fixed Eleanor with an earnest gaze. "But first, tell me truly, did Mr. Blackstone continue his pursuit after the ball?" Eleanor accepted the cup, grateful for the warmth between her chilled fingers. "He sent flowers the next morning, hothouse roses the size of cabbages, with a card expressing his deep concern for my sudden indisposition. My father intercepted them and had them delivered to the orphanage instead." Victoria's eyes danced. "Perfect. Now he'll imagine you charitable as well as beautiful. But enough of him. We have more important matters." She reached for a small leather-bound notebook on the side table, flipping it open with the air of a general unveiling battle plans. Eleanor felt a flicker of unease mixed with reluctant amusement. "Victoria, I haven't yet agreed to anything beyond attending the Historical Society lecture." "And I'm not asking you to sign a contract in blood," Victoria replied cheerfully. "I'm simply offering information. Think of it as preparation for an enjoyable afternoon of intellectual discussion. Nothing more." Eleanor sipped her tea, studying the younger woman. Victoria's motives were transparent. Desperate love for Julian Whitmore, frustration with her brother's protectiveness, but her sincerity was equally clear. There was no malice here, only a sister's fierce determination to secure happiness for everyone she loved. "Very well," Eleanor said at last. "Tell me about the lecture, and your brother." Victoria's face lit with triumph. She leaned forward, notebook in hand. "The topic is Preserving Industrial Heritage in an Age of Progress." Alexander helped choose it. "He's presenting a short paper on the restoration of the old iron foundry at our Hudson River estate, how to maintain historic integrity while adapting the structure for modern machinery." Eleanor's interest stirred genuinely. Adaptive reuse. It's a fascinating challenge. Too often, progress demands demolition. Exactly what Alexander believes, Victoria exclaimed. He spent years fighting developers who want to tear down anything over 50 years old in favor of bigger factories. He argues that strength and beauty can coexist, that we honor the past by making it functional for the future. She turned a page in her notebook. His favorite example is the Pont du Gard in France, the Roman aqueduct still carrying water after 18 centuries. He's read every treatise on Roman engineering available in English. And Gibbon's Decline and Fall, he's on his 5th reading. Eleanor smiled softly. My father has the full set in his library. I've borrowed the volumes on infrastructure more than once. Victoria's eyes gleamed. Perfect. Another point of connection. She continued, voice lowering conspiratorially. Alexander dislikes crowds. At events, he gravitates toward quieter corners or display cases where he can study without interruption. He appreciates direct conversation, no fluttering fans or coy hints. If you have an opinion, state it plainly. Eleanor set her cup down. You make this sound like reconnaissance for a diplomatic mission. It rather is, Victoria admitted without shame. Society courtship is all artifice and performance. This is merely efficient. Every ambitious mama in New York researches eligible bachelors before launching their daughters. I'm simply doing the same in reverse. There was logic in that, Eleanor conceded silently, though it still sat uneasily. She had spent the season enduring calculated flirtations from men who viewed her as a lucrative merger. Was this truly so different? More tea? Victoria asked, refilling without waiting. Now, practical details. Alexander takes his coffee black, no sugar. He works in his study until dawn when troubled by a design problem. He's progressive on labor conditions, shorter hours, better ventilation in the factories, but conservative on financial risk. He despises speculation. She paused, expression softening. And Eleanor, he's lonely. Terribly so. Since our parents died 5 years ago, typhoid within weeks of each other, he's carried everything alone. The business, the estate, my future. He believes love is a luxury he cannot afford because someone must remain vigilant. The vulnerability in Victoria's voice pierced Eleanor's reservations. She understood duty's weight. Her own father's shipping empire demanded constant attention, and since her mother's death, Eleanor had managed much of the household correspondence and charitable obligations. I'm not asking you to pretend, Victoria continued quietly. Only to be yourself. The woman who understands harbor engineering and Roman aqueducts. If you and Alexander connect naturally, wonderful. If not, we've both enjoyed a stimulating lecture and perhaps gained a friend. Eleanor studied the invitation card Victoria slid across the table, heavy cream stock, embossed with the Historical Society seal. The lecture was in 5 days at the Society's Grand Hall on Broadway. One more thing, Victoria added, almost as an afterthought. Alexander is guarded. He's been pursued for his fortune since he turned 21. He assumes interest is mercenary until proven otherwise. Earnest conversation about load-bearing arches will disarm him far more effectively than flattery ever could. Eleanor laughed despite herself. I've no intention of flattering anyone about load-bearing arches unless I genuinely admire them. Then you're perfect, Victoria declared. She closed her notebook with a satisfied snap. I've taken membership in your name as well. You'll have full access to the displays before the lecture begins. They spent the remainder of the visit discussing lighter topics. Books, the latest exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum, Victoria's hopeless attempts at watercolor. Yet beneath the pleasantries, Eleanor felt the subtle shift. She had stepped onto a path whose destination remained uncertain. When she rose to leave, Victoria embraced her again. Thank you for indulging me. Whatever happens, I'm truly glad we met. So am I, Eleanor replied, surprising herself with the truth of it. Outside, the winter sun had dipped behind clouds, casting the avenue in soft gray light. As her carriage pulled away, Eleanor glanced back at the Langford mansion, its windows glowing warmly against the cold. She ought to feel manipulated, perhaps even outraged. Instead, she felt a quiet thrill of anticipation. In 5 days, she would attend a lecture on industrial heritage. She would likely encounter Alexander Langford. And if Victoria's instincts proved correct, she might finally meet a man who valued her mind as much as, if not more than, her fortune. The thought should have alarmed her with its calculated origins. Instead, it felt like the first breath of fresh air after months in a stuffy ballroom. The Grand Hall of the New York Historical Society on Broadway buzzed with restrained excitement on the afternoon of the lecture. Gas chandeliers cast a warm glow over mahogany panels and glass display cases filled with architectural drawings, scale models of bridges, and photographs of crumbling factories rescued from demolition. Gentlemen in frock coats clustered around exhibits, murmuring over blueprints, while a handful of ladies, members bold enough to defy convention, moved among them with notebooks in hand. Eleanor arrived early as planned. She had chosen her attire with care, a tailored day dress of deep forest green wool, severe enough to signal seriousness, yet elegantly cut to flatter her slender figure. Her dark hair was pinned in a simple classic chignon, with only a small emerald brooch at her throat for ornament. No frivolous curls or excessive jewelry, she wanted to be taken seriously among scholars, not mistaken for a social butterfly. Victoria had sent a note that morning. Alexander is already there, dark gray coat, near the display on suspension cables. I'll be in the balcony with Julian, incognito of course. Good luck, my brilliant conspirator. Eleanor smiled at the memory as she surrendered her cloak to the attendant and stepped into the main hall. Nerves fluttered in her stomach, but she pressed them down. This was, after all, a subject she genuinely loved. Whatever Victoria's motives, Eleanor was here for the ideas as much as the introduction. She drifted toward the central exhibit, a large model of the forthcoming Brooklyn Bridge, its towers rising dramatically above a miniature East River. Detailed drawings surrounded it, stress calculations, cable designs, stone anchorage plans. Eleanor leaned closer, studying the innovative use of steel wire ropes. Roebling's diagonal stays are revolutionary, came a deep, quiet voice beside her. They distribute wind load in ways masonry alone never could. Eleanor turned, and there he was. Alexander Langford stood a respectful distance away, tall and broad-shouldered in a perfectly tailored charcoal frock coat. His hair was dark, slightly wavy, with a tendency to fall across his forehead as though he frequently pushed it back while poring over plans. His features were strong, high cheekbones, a firm jaw, but it was his eyes that arrested her, gray, intensely intelligent, and at this moment fixed on the bridge model with genuine absorption. He glanced at her briefly, politely, then returned his attention to the exhibit, assuming she would offer the usual cursory agreement. Instead, Eleanor replied, "Yet the diagonal stays also complicate construction. The caissons had to be sunk deeper than anticipated to anchor them properly. I've read the reports of the decompression sickness among the workers. Tragic, but the engineering triumph may justify the cost." Alexander's head turned fully now, surprise flickering across his face. "You've read the caisson reports? My father's shipping company relies on safe harbors," she said evenly. "I review engineering surveys regularly. The bridge will change commerce forever." For a moment he simply studied her, as though reassessing. Then a faint, appreciative smile touched his mouth, the kind that reached his eyes and transformed stern features into something unexpectedly warm. "Most people see only the romance of the towers," he said. "Few consider the human and structural cost beneath the waterline." They fell into conversation easily, almost effortlessly. He spoke of his own experiments with cable strength at the Langford Iron Works. She countered with questions about galvanic corrosion in saltwater environments. He described the challenges of restoring the old foundry on his Hudson estate, preserving original stonework while reinforcing for modern loads. Eleanor shared her ideas on adaptive harbor facilities, drawing from her father's correspondence with city planners. Time slipped away. Other attendees drifted past, but Alexander made no move to excuse himself. Instead, he guided her toward a quieter display on the side wall, photographs of abandoned canals and mills across New England. "Progress renders them obsolete," he said, voice lower now, "yet they represent ingenuity we're in danger of forgetting. I believe we can honor the past without halting the future." "I agree," Eleanor replied. "Demolition is easy. Restoration requires vision." He looked at her then, truly looked, his gray eyes searching hers with a directness that made her breath catch. "Forgive me, but we have not been introduced. I am Alexander Langford." "Eleanor Harrington," she said, offering her hand. He took it briefly, his grip firm and warm. "Harrington, as in Harrington Shipping?" "The same. Though I claim no credit for the fleet. My contributions are limited to correspondence and occasional harassment of engineers." His smile deepened. "A valuable service. Engineers benefit from intelligent harassment." A bell rang softly in the distance, signaling the lecture's imminent start. Around them, the crowd began moving toward the auditorium. Alexander hesitated, then offered his arm with formal courtesy. "Would you care to sit together, Miss Harrington? I confess I'd welcome continued discussion of intelligent harassment." Eleanor placed her hand lightly on his sleeve. "I would like that very much." They found seats near the center aisle. As the speaker, an eminent architect from Boston, began his address on preserving industrial landmarks, Eleanor stole a glance at Alexander. He listened intently, occasionally leaning slightly toward her to murmur a quiet comment or question. She responded in kind, their whispered exchange drawing a few disapproving glances from nearby matrons, but neither cared. When Alexander presented his brief paper midway through, calm, precise, passionate about balancing heritage and utility, the audience listened in respectful silence. Eleanor felt an unexpected swell of pride, as though she had some small stake in his success. Afterward, during the reception in the adjoining gallery, he remained at her side. They sampled punch and examined photographs of European iron bridges together. He asked about her thoughts on the Hudson River rail tunnel proposals. She challenged his views on labor conditions in steel mills. Conversation flowed like a river finding its natural course, deep, swift, and entirely unforced. Only when the hall began to empty did reality intrude. Alexander glanced at the tall windows, where dusk had fallen and snow had begun to swirl against the panes. "I've kept you far longer than propriety allows," he said, a note of regret in his voice. "May I see you home, Miss Harrington?" "Thank you, but my carriage is waiting." She paused, then added honestly, "I've enjoyed this afternoon immensely, Mr. Langford. Your paper was excellent. And your insights were invaluable," he replied. His gaze held hers a moment longer than necessary. "Might I, that is, would you permit me to call on you? With your father's permission, of course. I would very much like to continue our discussion." Eleanor's heart gave a quiet, traitorous leap. "I would like that," she said softly. He bowed over her hand, his lips brushing her gloved knuckles in the barest courtesy. "Then I shall call on Tuesday if that is convenient." Tuesday would be perfect. As she stepped out into the snowy evening and her carriage pulled forward, Eleanor leaned back against the cushions, a slow smile curving her lips. The lecture had been everything Victoria promised: stimulating, enlightening. And Alexander Langford had been more. Intelligent, reserved, yet capable of genuine warmth. A man who listened as much as he spoke, who valued ideas over idle flattery. A man who had looked at her and seen not an heiress, but a mind worth engaging. Victoria's scheme had worked flawlessly. And that, Eleanor realized with a sudden twist of guilt, was precisely the problem. Because everything tonight had felt utterly, dangerously real, and it had begun with careful orchestration. As the carriage rolled through the lamplit streets toward home, snowflakes dancing in the wind, Eleanor pressed her fingers to the spot on her glove where his lips had touched. Tuesday he would call. And by Tuesday she would need to decide how much truth she dared to offer the most intriguing man she had ever met. Tuesday arrived with a pale winter sun struggling through thin clouds, casting soft light across the Harrington drawing room on 62nd Street. Eleanor had spent the morning in a state of quiet agitation, rearranging flowers twice, changing her gown once, and finally settling on a simple afternoon dress of deep burgundy velvet that complemented her dark hair without appearing overly eager. When the butler announced Mr. Alexander Langford at precisely 3 o'clock, her heart performed an undignified leap. Alexander entered with the same quiet assurance she remembered from the lecture hall, his charcoal overcoat dusted with a few stray snowflakes. He carried no bouquet, only a small leather-bound volume that he presented to her father with formal courtesy before turning to her. "Miss Harrington," he said, bowing over her hand. His gray eyes held a warmth that had been merely hinted at before. "Thank you for receiving me." The first quarter hour passed in polite conversation with her father present, discussion of shipping tariffs, the latest news from the Brooklyn Bridge construction, mutual acquaintances on various charitable boards. Mr. Harrington, sharp-eyed and protective, observed the visitor closely but found little to fault in his manners or intellect. At last, with a discreet nod to his daughter, her father withdrew to his study, leaving the door decorously ajar. Alexander exhaled as though releasing a breath he'd been holding. "I confess I've been looking forward to this since Saturday," he said, settling into the chair opposite hers. "Our discussion at the society was uncommonly stimulating." Eleanor smiled, pouring tea with steady hands despite the flutter in her chest. "I felt the same. Your paper on adaptive reuse was thoughtful. I've been considering your points about load distribution in historic stonework." They slipped easily into conversation, first about engineering, then drifting to shared readings. He had brought the volume he carried, a rare edition of Vitruvius's De Architectura, translated and annotated. "I thought you might appreciate the marginalia on aqueduct maintenance," he said, a faint flush rising on his cheeks, an endearing contrast to his usual composure. For nearly an hour they spoke of Roman hydraulics, the challenges of modern sewage systems, The ethics of preservation versus progress. Eleanor forgot Victoria's careful briefing. She forgot the orchestrated origins of their meeting. She was simply talking with a man who listened as though her opinions mattered as much as his own. When the conversation lulled, Alexander set his cup down and regarded her steadily. "May I be frank, Miss Harrington? Please. I attend many such events, lectures, society meetings, and I am accustomed to polite agreement or shallow admiration. Rarely do I encounter someone who challenges my assumptions or offers genuine insight." He paused, choosing his words with care. Saturday was refreshing. "You see the world as it is, not merely as society wishes it presented." Warmth spread through her at his words, mingled with fresh guilt. He believed their meeting serendipitous. He believed her interest unprompted. Before she could respond, he continued, "I would very much like to call again if you would permit it. Perhaps an outing. The Metropolitan Museum has a new exhibition on industrial design. Or a drive in the park if the weather improves." "I would enjoy that," she said softly. Over the following weeks, their courtship unfolded with surprising naturalness. Alexander called twice more that first week, once for tea, once to escort her and her aunt to a Philharmonic concert where they whispered critiques of the acoustics in the new hall. He sent no extravagant gifts, only thoughtful ones. A pamphlet on harbor dredging techniques, a small sketch of a proposed Hudson River pier redesign he'd been working on. They took a sleigh ride through Central Park when snow fell thick and silent, blankets tucked around them as the horses' bells jingled. He spoke of his childhood summers at the Hudson estate, restoring the old foundry with his father before the typhoid took both parents. His voice grew quiet as he described the years since, assuming responsibility at 25, guiding the company through economic uncertainty, shielding Victoria from fortune hunters. "I fear I've become more guardian than brother," he admitted, breath clouding in the cold air. "She accuses me of suffocating her, and perhaps she's right. But after losing mother and father so suddenly, the thought of harm coming to her is unbearable." Eleanor listened, understanding the weight of legacy and loss. Her own mother's death had left similar echoes in her life. One afternoon at the Metropolitan Museum, they lingered in the Arms and Armor Hall long after other visitors had moved on. Alexander stood before a display of medieval bridge models, hands clasped behind his back. "Sometimes I feel like one of these old structures," he said quietly. "Solid enough to bear great weight but isolated. Everyone admires the strength from a distance, but few wish to cross the span." The vulnerability in his voice pierced her. She laid a gloved hand on his arm. "Strength need not mean solitude, Mr. Langford." He turned, covering her hand with his. "Alexander," he corrected gently. "And I hope you're right, Eleanor." That evening Victoria arrived unannounced at the Harrington residence, eyes bright with barely contained excitement. "Tell me everything," she demanded the moment they were alone in the morning room. "He's called 4 times in 10 days, an absolute record. And the sleigh ride, half of society saw you together. What did you discuss? Did he mention Julian? Has he softened at all?" Eleanor poured tea with deliberate calm. "We've spoken of many things, engineering, history, family. He's remarkable, Victoria. Truly." Victoria clasped her hands. "I knew it. You're perfect for each other." She leaned forward eagerly. "Now I've learned a few more details that might help deepen things. He's particularly sensitive about speculation scandals. His father nearly lost everything in '73 because of a dishonest partner. And he admires directness. If you disagree with him, say so plainly. Also his favorite." "Stop." Eleanor set her cup down with a soft clink. "Victoria, I can't accept more guidance." Victoria blinked. "But it's only information too. It feels like continuing a deception." Eleanor met her friend's gaze steadily. "Everything between Alexander and me has become real. Wonderfully, unexpectedly real. But it began with calculation, your plan, the carriage, the lecture. If this is to continue, it must be honest." Victoria's excitement dimmed. "You're not thinking of telling him?" "I don't know yet," Eleanor admitted. "But I cannot keep accepting strategic intelligence as though we're playing chess with his affections." Victoria reached for her hand. "Eleanor, please. Just a bit longer." Once he's truly attached, once he sees how happy you make each other, he'll forgive the unconventional beginning. And then he'll be more open to Julian. Eleanor withdrew her hand gently. That's precisely the problem. Building something genuine on continued concealment feels wrong. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken fears. Finally Victoria sighed. I only want everyone I love to be happy. Including Alexander, who's forgotten how. I know, Eleanor said softly. And I want that too. More than I expected. But as Victoria departed, promising to give her space, Eleanor stood at the window watching snow swirl against the glass. Alexander had begun to occupy her thoughts constantly. His quiet intensity, his rare smiles, the way he listened as though her words truly mattered. Their connection felt authentic, profound. Yet every moment of closeness was shadowed by the knowledge that it had been carefully engineered. And the deeper she fell, the more impossible confession seemed, and the more necessary it became. Because if Alexander ever discovered the truth from someone else, or suspected he'd been maneuvered like a piece on a board, the fragile bridge they were building might collapse entirely. And Eleanor was no longer certain she could bear losing him. The weeks following Eleanor's refusal to accept more of Victoria's helpful details passed in a blur of stolen happiness and growing torment. Alexander's courtship intensified with quiet steadiness. He called almost daily, sometimes for afternoon tea, sometimes to escort her to a lecture on railway engineering or an exhibition of architectural photographs at the Academy of Design. They took long walks along the reservoir in Central Park, debating the merits of granite versus limestone for bridge piers while the winter wind whipped their coats. He began signing his brief, thoughtful notes simply Alexander, and she, after hesitation, replied as Eleanor. Every moment with him felt luminous. He listened to her ideas on harbor expansion with the same gravity he gave his chief engineers. He laughed, truly laughed, at her dry observations about society's absurdities. When a sudden sleet storm caught them during a drive, he sheltered her with his coat without a second thought, his arm lingering protectively around her shoulders long after they reached shelter. And with every shared confidence, every lingering glance, Eleanor's feelings deepened into something undeniable. Love, quiet, profound and terrifying in its intensity. Yet the brighter that love burned, the darker the shadow of its origins grew. Victoria, true to her word, had ceased offering strategic intelligence. But her hopeful notes arrived regularly. Has he mentioned Julian? Has he softened on artists? Eleanor's replies grew shorter, evasive. She could not bring herself to use Alexander's growing affection as leverage for Victoria's cause, yet she could not bring herself to confess either, not when each day with him felt like a gift she was terrified to lose. One gray February afternoon, after Alexander had left following a particularly intimate conversation about their childhood dreams, he had wanted to build bridges across oceans. She had wanted to explore ancient Roman roads. Eleanor sat alone in the library, staring at the fire. The guilt had become a living thing, coiled in her chest, tightening with every heartbeat. She had participated in a deception. However well-intentioned, however minor the orchestration now seemed beside the genuine connection that had blossomed, the foundation was flawed. Alexander believed their meeting pure chance. He believed her interest spontaneous. He was opening his guarded heart because he trusted the authenticity of what they shared. And every time he looked at her with that rare, unguarded warmth, she felt the lie like a stain. That evening Victoria called unexpectedly, her usual brightness dimmed by worry. "Eleanor, I must speak with you," she said the moment they were alone in the small sitting room. Snow tapped against the windows like impatient fingers. Eleanor steeled herself. "Victoria? I know you asked me to stop pressing," Victoria interrupted, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "And I have. But Julian has received an offer, a commission to paint murals in Chicago. It would establish his reputation, provide steady income. He wants to accept, but he won't leave New York without knowing whether there's hope for us." She looked up, eyes pleading. "He's prepared to wait, but not forever. And Alexander still refuses to meet him. He says Julian's profession makes him unstable, that his family's lost fortune proves poor judgment. He won't even hear Julian's side." Eleanor's heart ached for her friend. "I'm sorry. Have you said nothing at all? Not even planted the idea that artists can be responsible?" "I won't manipulate him," Eleanor said quietly. "Not anymore." Victoria's frustration spilled over. "But you're not manipulating. You're simply encouraging openness. Alexander listens to you now. He values your opinion. One word from you, No, the word came out sharper than intended. Eleanor softened her tone. Victoria, I care for your brother deeply. More than I thought possible. And because of that, I cannot use his trust as a tool. Victoria stared at her, comprehension dawning. You're going to tell him. I have to, Eleanor whispered. Before this goes any further. Before an engagement, before promises that would make the truth devastating. He'll be furious, Victoria said, voice trembling. He'll feel betrayed by both of us. He might end everything with you. And then he'll never approve Julian. The words struck like blows, but Eleanor held steady. If he ends it because I chose honesty, then what we have isn't strong enough to last anyway. And I won't build a life on secrets. Tears welled in Victoria's eyes. I never meant harm. I only wanted him happy. And you seemed perfect. I know, Eleanor said gently, reaching for her friend's hand. Your intentions were kind. But kindness through deception becomes cruelty when the truth emerges. Victoria pulled away, standing abruptly. I thought you were my friend. I am, Eleanor replied, throat tight. Which is why I won't let you or myself continue this way. After Victoria left, tears streaming silently down her cheeks, Eleanor remained by the fire long into the night. She replayed every moment with Alexander, the first spark at the lecture, the sleigh ride confessions, the way his hand had lingered on hers when they parted yesterday. All real, all precious, and all resting on a foundation she could no longer ignore. The following days were agony. Alexander called as planned, bringing a small model he'd crafted, a miniature suspension bridge inspired by their discussions. His eyes searched hers when she greeted him more quietly than usual. Is something troubling you? He asked softly once they were alone. She nearly confessed then and there. But her father had joined them unexpectedly, and the moment passed. That night, sleepless, Eleanor penned a letter she did not send. Dear Alexander, there is something I must tell you, something about how we met that changes everything. I am terrified of losing you, yet more terrified of keeping you through silence. She burned it in the grate at dawn. By the end of the week, the weight had become unbearable. Every smile she gave him felt false. Every touch felt stolen. She made her decision during a solitary walk in the snow-muffled park. The next time he called, Thursday, she would tell him everything. The carriage, Victoria's scheme, her initial complicity, the growing love that had made honesty imperative. Whatever the cost. Thursday dawned iron gray with a steady rain lashing the windows. Eleanor dressed carefully in a somber gown of deep navy, as though preparing for morning. She dismissed the maid early, needing solitude. When the butler announced Mr. Langford at 3 o'clock sharp, her heart pounded so violently she feared he would hear it. Alexander entered, shaking rain from his coat, his expression shifting from anticipation to concern the moment he saw her face. Eleanor, he said, crossing to her immediately. You're pale. Are you unwell? She gestured to the sofa. Please sit. There is something I must tell you. Something difficult. His brow furrowed, but he obeyed, watching her with quiet intensity. Eleanor remained standing, hands clasped to still their trembling. Before I begin, she said, voice barely steady, please know that what I feel for you is real. More real than anything I've ever known. But how we came to this moment was not entirely honest. She took a deep breath and began. The confession poured out, the desperate flight from Blackstone, tumbling into Victoria's carriage, the whirlwind conversation, Victoria's desperate scheme to distract him with a compatible woman, the tea where details were shared, the orchestrated presence at the lecture. She spared nothing. Her initial curiosity, her growing complicity, her eventual refusal of further guidance, and the guilt that had finally overwhelmed her. When she finished, the silence was absolute save for the rain against the panes. Alexander's face had gone very still, his gray eyes unreadable. At last he spoke, voice low and carefully controlled. So everything, our meeting, our conversations, your interest in my work, was engineered. No, Eleanor said urgently. The circumstances were engineered. My interest is genuine. The connection we've built since that first discussion at the bridge model, that has been real. Every moment. He stood, moving to the window, presenting his back to her. How can I possibly separate the two? He asked quietly. Every word you spoke that day, every opinion you offered, how do I know it wasn't shaped by what Victoria told you? Because you know me now, she whispered. You've seen me challenge your ideas, disagree with you, share thoughts Victoria could never have predicted. The woman you've come to know these past weeks. That is me. Only me. He turned then, and the raw hurt in his eyes nearly undid her. I thought I'd found someone who saw me, he said. Not the fortune, not the factories. Just me. And now I discover it began as my sister's manipulation, with you as the instrument. Tears slipped down Eleanor's cheeks. I was wrong to participate even briefly. I should have told you immediately. But Alexander, I swear, the love I feel is not part of any scheme. It grew despite the beginnings, not because of them. He looked at her for a long, agonizing moment. I need time, he said at last, to think, to understand what is real. He bowed, formal, distant, and left without another word. Eleanor sank onto the sofa as the door closed behind him, tears falling unchecked. She had chosen honesty. And in doing so, she may have lost the only man who had ever truly seen her soul. The days following Alexander's departure blurred into a gray haze of regret and relentless self-reproach. Eleanor moved through the Harrington household like a ghost, attending meals in silence, offering mechanical smiles to her father's concerned inquiries, retreating early to her room where she could stare at the ceiling and replay every word of the confession. He had not returned. No note, no call, no message delivered through a mutual acquaintance. Only silence, cold, absolute, and damning. She had expected anger. She had braced for a swift, decisive end. What she had not prepared for was this void, this absence that seemed to confirm her worst fear, that once the illusion of serendipity was stripped away, what remained was not enough to hold him. Victoria sent one letter, delivered by hand 2 days after the confession. Eleanor, Alexander has locked himself in his study since Thursday. He will not speak of what passed between you, only says that he requires time to think. He has cancelled all engagements, even the bridge committee meeting he helped organize. I have never seen him like this, not even after mother and father died. I blame myself entirely. My foolish scheme has wounded the 2 people I love most. Please forgive me. If there is anything I can do to mend this, tell me. Victoria. Eleanor read the note 3 times, tears blurring the ink, then folded it away in her writing desk. She penned no reply. What could she say? That Victoria's intentions, however loving, had planted a seed of doubt that honesty alone might not uproot? Her father noticed, of course. Theodore Harrington was not a man to miss the sudden pallor in his daughter's cheeks or the way her eyes no longer brightened at mention of the season's events. One evening after dinner, he joined her in the library, pouring 2 small glasses of brandy before settling into the chair opposite hers. You've been quiet these past days, he said gently. And young Langford has not called since Thursday. Am I to assume the courtship has ended? Eleanor stared into the fire. It may have. May have. She hesitated, then met his gaze. I told him something he found difficult to accept. Something about how we met. He needed time. Mr. Harrington studied her for a long moment. Langford is a good man, serious, honorable. Whatever you told him, if it was the truth, he will come to terms with it in time. But if it was not the full truth, he trailed off, letting the implication hang. It was the full truth, she said quietly. Perhaps too late. He nodded slowly. Truth delayed can wound as deeply as falsehood, Eleanor. But it is still truth. Give him time. And give yourself grace. The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. She excused herself soon after, retreating to her room where she finally allowed the tears to fall unchecked. Sleep became elusive. She lay awake imagining Alexander alone in his study, poring over ledgers or bridge designs to avoid thinking of her. She pictured his gray eyes, once warm with interest, now cold with betrayal. Every memory of their time together, once precious, now carried a sting. The lecture hall conversation, the sleigh ride, the museum confession of loneliness. All tainted. Society, merciless as ever, began to whisper. At a small musical evening she could not avoid attending, she overheard fragments in the ladies' withdrawing room. Did you see Miss Harrington? Quite pale. I understand Mr. Langford has withdrawn his attentions. Such a promising match too. One wonders what she could have done. Eleanor held her head high, but the words followed her home like shadows. A week stretched into 10 days. Snow turned to slush in the streets. The city prepared for Lent with subdued gatherings. Invitations arrived and were politely declined. Eleanor took long walks with only her maid for company, finding solace in the bare branches of Central Park and the distant rumble of construction on the bridge. She began to accept that it was over. Alexander had weighed what they shared against the deception of its origins and found it wanting. He had chosen solitude over the risk of trusting her again. And perhaps he was right. Perhaps love built on any measure of calculation could never be fully sound. On the 12th day, a package arrived, delivered by a Langford footman who departed without waiting for reply. Inside was the small suspension bridge model Alexander had brought during his last visit, wrapped carefully in tissue. No note accompanied it. Only the model returned. Eleanor held it in trembling hands, tracing the delicate cables he had crafted with such precision. The gesture spoke volumes, a polite, final severance. He was returning what belonged to their courtship, closing the door with courtesy rather than anger. She placed the model on her dressing table and wept, quiet, wrenching sobs that left her exhausted. That night she wrote a letter she knew she would not send. Alexander, I do not ask forgiveness, only understanding. I chose truth because anything less would have dishonored what I feel for you, what I will always feel. If that choice has cost me your regard, I accept it, though it breaks my heart. I wish you every happiness. You deserve someone who meets you without shadow or artifice from the first moment. Eleanor. She burned it in the grate, watching the flames consume the words as they had consumed her hope. Victoria called once more, braving the cold. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her usual vivacity dimmed. He still will not speak of it, she said quietly. But he has agreed to meet Julian next week. For my sake, he says, not Julian's. A concession at least. Eleanor managed a faint smile. I'm glad. You deserve your happiness. And you deserve yours, Victoria whispered. I am so sorry, Eleanor. I never imagined. I know, Eleanor interrupted gently. It was my choice to participate and my choice to confess. The consequences are mine. After Victoria left, Eleanor stood at her bedroom window, watching sleet streak the glass. She felt hollowed out, grief not only for the loss of Alexander, but for the version of herself she had glimpsed in his company, engaged, challenged, truly seen. That woman seemed to have vanished with him. Spring would come eventually. The season would continue. Suitors would reappear, Reginald Blackstone chief among them, no doubt. Life would resume its expected course. Advantageous marriage, management of households and charities, a respectable place in society. But the thought brought no comfort. Because for a brief, shining moment, she had tasted something rarer, connection built on shared passion and mutual respect. And now that it was gone, everything else felt colorless. Eleanor turned from the window, blowing out her candle. In the darkness, she whispered to the empty room, I would rather have loved you honestly and lost you than kept you through silence. The words offered no solace. But they were true. And in the lowest depths of her sorrow, that truth was the only light she had left. March crept into New York with tentative warmth, crocuses pushing through the thawing soil of private gardens, the Hudson River ice breaking into slow-moving flows. Yet inside the Harrington townhouse, winter lingered in Eleanor's heart. 3 weeks had passed since Alexander's silent withdrawal. The returned bridge model still sat on her dressing table, a daily reminder of what had been lost. She touched it sometimes, tracing the tiny cables, wondering if he had hesitated before sending it back. She had resumed a semblance of routine, morning calls with her aunt, charitable committee meetings, correspondence for her father's shipping concerns. Outwardly composed, inwardly she carried a quiet ache that colored everything gray. Victoria's reports, delivered through brief, careful notes, offered no comfort. Alexander had met Julian Whitmore at last, a stiff dinner at the Langford mansion. He had listened politely to the young artist's plans, examined sketches of proposed murals, acknowledged the Chicago Commission's prestige. But approval remained withheld. He says he requires further proof of stability, Victoria wrote, frustration evident even in ink. Eleanor did not reply. She could not bear to hear more of Alexander's life continuing without her. One mild afternoon, as Eleanor reviewed harbor dredging estimates in her father's library, sunlight slanted through the tall windows and fell across the desk. She paused, pen suspended, staring at the precise figures and diagrams. They reminded her inescapably of shared conversations, of Alexander's voice explaining load tolerances, of his rare smile when she countered with an unexpected insight. The ache sharpened into something fiercer, not mere sorrow but resolve. She had chosen honesty because it was right. She had accepted the consequences because they were just. But acceptance need not mean surrender. If Alexander believed their connection irreparably tainted, perhaps he was correct. Yet she knew, in the marrow of her bones, that what had grown between them was rare and real. Not the orchestrated beginning, but the hundreds of moments after. The debates, the silences, the way his presence had made her feel fully alive. She deserved the chance to prove it. Not through pleading or persuasion but through unwavering truth. That evening after dinner she sought her father in his study. "Papa," she said quietly, closing the door behind her, "I need your advice." Theodore Harrington looked up from his ledger, removing his spectacles. "About Langford?" She nodded, seating herself opposite him. "I told him the truth about how Victoria arranged our introduction. He felt betrayed, understandably, and has withdrawn. I thought time would clarify matters, but weeks have passed with only silence." Her father leaned back, studying her. "And what do you wish to do?" "I wish to see him once more. Not to beg forgiveness, I've already offered that, but to speak plainly. To let him know that while I regret my part in the deception, I do not regret us. If he still chooses distance after that, I will accept it fully." Mr. Harrington considered this, fingers steepled. "Langford is proud, and he has been pursued for his position since boyhood. Trust comes hard to him. But he is also fair. If you approach with dignity, no drama, no manipulation, he will listen." He paused, then added gently, "You are my daughter, Eleanor. You have a keen mind and a steady heart. Do not underestimate your worth because one man struggles to see past a flawed beginning." Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Thank you, Papa." The next morning she penned a letter, short, direct, uncompromising. "Dear Alexander, I will not presume to request a renewal of our acquaintance if your decision is final. But I find I cannot let silence be the last word between us. I would be grateful for the opportunity to speak with you once more, not to excuse past actions which I have already acknowledged as wrong, but to affirm what I believe remains true. If you are willing, I will call at your home on Thursday at 3 o'clock. If you are not, I will understand and trouble you no further. Yours sincerely, Eleanor Harrington. She sealed it with her family crest and dispatched it by footman before doubt could overtake resolve. The wait until Thursday felt eternal. She prepared carefully, not with elaborate gowns or calculated charm, but with quiet intention. She chose a simple walking dress of soft gray wool, severe yet elegant, her dark hair pinned plainly. No jewelry save her mother's small pearl brooch. She wanted him to see her clearly, no artifice, no performance. At 3 o'clock precisely, her carriage stopped before the Langford mansion. The footman who answered wore an expression of careful neutrality as he led her to the formal drawing room. "Alexander is waiting." He stood by the fireplace, tall and composed in a dark morning coat, hands clasped behind his back. His face was thinner than she remembered, shadows beneath his gray eyes suggesting sleepless nights. Yet when he turned to her, his gaze was steady. "Miss Harrington," he said formally, bowing. "Thank you for your letter. Please sit." She took the offered chair, folding her hands to still their tremor. He remained standing, a subtle distance that spoke volumes. "I will not prolong this," she began, voice calm despite her racing heart. "I came to say 3 things. He inclined his head, waiting. "First, I stand by my confession. My participation in Victoria's scheme was wrong, and I regret it deeply. I should have refused from the beginning, and certainly should have revealed it sooner." He nodded once, expression unreadable. "Second, what developed between us after that first meeting was genuine. My interest in your work, my opinions, my affection, all of it grew independently of any orchestration. You came to know me, Alexander, not a role I was playing. I believe you felt the same connection I did." A flicker crossed his face, something raw and quickly suppressed. "Third," she continued, meeting his eyes directly, "I love you. Not the industrial magnate, not the guardian of your sister's future. You, the man who sketches bridges at dawn, who listens as though ideas matter more than convention, who carries duty with grace but loneliness with silence. I love that man, and I believe he is worth fighting for." She rose, smoothing her skirt. "I do not ask you to forgive the past today. I ask only that you consider whether the woman standing before you now, The one who chose truth over convenience even at the cost of losing you, is worth knowing further. If the answer is no, I will leave and never impose again. The silence stretched, heavy with possibility. At last he spoke, voice low. Your courage in coming here humbles me. He moved closer, stopping an arm's length away. I have spent these weeks examining every moment we shared, searching for artifice. And I found none, after that first day. Your mind, your spirit, the way you challenge and complement my own thoughts, those were real. Hope stirred, fragile but bright. But trust, he said quietly, once cracked does not mend easily. I need time, not to punish but to be certain. I understand, she replied softly. He reached into his pocket and withdrew something small. Opening his palm, he revealed the tiny suspension bridge model, the one he had returned. I could not keep it, he said. Not as an ending. But I could not discard it either. He placed it gently in her hand. Keep it safe for now. When I am ready, if I am ready, I will ask for it back. Eleanor closed her fingers around the delicate structure, tears threatening but held in check. Thank you, she whispered. He escorted her to the door himself, his hand briefly at her elbow, a touch both careful and warm. Eleanor, he said as she stepped into the hall, using her name for the first time in weeks. I do not yet know the path forward. But I find I am no longer willing to close the door entirely. She met his gaze, heart full. That is more than I dared hope. Outside, the March sun broke through clouds, gilding the avenue in sudden light. Eleanor climbed into her carriage, the small model cradled in her palm. She had laid her heart bare. The outcome remained uncertain. But for the first time in weeks, possibility glimmered on the horizon, like sunlight on thawing ice, promising spring. April arrived in a rush of pale green buds and warm southern breezes, softening the city's edges. Eleanor had not seen Alexander since her visit to the Langford mansion 3 weeks earlier. The small bridge model remained in her possession, tucked safely in a velvet-lined box on her writing desk, untouched but never out of her thoughts. His words that day echoed constantly, I am no longer willing to close the door entirely. Yet no further communication had come. No note, no chance meeting engineered by society, no word through Victoria. Only waiting, patient, agonizing waiting. Eleanor filled the days with purposeful activity. Overseeing spring plantings in the conservatory, assisting her father with negotiations for new steamship routes, attending lectures alone. She refused to pine visibly. But in quiet moments doubt crept in. Perhaps his pride, or his fear of further betrayal, had won. Perhaps the crack in his trust was too deep to mend. Then, on a rain-swept Thursday afternoon, a note arrived in Alexander's bold, precise hand. Eleanor, I have spent these weeks reflecting as promised. I find I have more to say, things best said in person. If you are willing, I will call tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Alexander. Her heart raced as she read it twice, 3 times. No warmth in the words, but no finality either. An opening. She replied immediately, I shall be at home. Friday dawned clear, sunlight pouring through the drawing-room windows and gilding the polished floors. Eleanor dressed with quiet care, a gown of soft ivory muslin embroidered with delicate vines, her dark hair swept up simply. She wanted no distraction from the truth they both needed to face. At 3 o'clock precisely, Alexander was announced. He entered alone, no hat or coat. He had left them in the hall. His expression was serious but not cold. The shadows beneath his eyes had faded. In their place was a resolute calm. Eleanor, he greeted, bowing. When he straightened, his gaze held hers steadily. Thank you for receiving me. She gestured to the sofa. Please. This time he sat, though at a respectful distance. The silence between them stretched, charged but not hostile. At last he spoke. I have been unforgivably silent these past weeks. You asked for time, she said quietly. I gave it. He inclined his head in acknowledgement. And I used it, perhaps too much. I examined every moment we shared, searching for deception. I spoke with Victoria at length. She confessed everything, her motives, her methods, her remorse. Eleanor's breath caught. And? She loves fiercely, he said, a faint, rueful smile touching his mouth. Sometimes to the detriment of good sense. She believed she was saving us both from loneliness. Misguided, yes. Malicious, no. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped. But my anger was not truly at her. It was at the realization that the one thing I thought I had found, someone who saw me without agenda, was built on agenda. Eleanor's heart twisted. I understand. Do you? His voice lowered. Because I have come to realize something these weeks apart. The pain of your confession was sharp, yes, but the pain of your absence was sharper. Hope flickered, fragile and bright. He met her eyes directly. I missed you. Not the idea of you, not the convenience of compatible conversation. Your insight, your steadiness, the way you challenged me to be better than my fears. I missed the woman who chose truth when silence would have secured everything she wanted. Tears pricked her eyes, but she held his gaze. I was wrong to withdraw so completely, he continued. I told myself I needed certainty, but truly I was protecting myself from vulnerability. After our parents died, I built walls, duty, responsibility, control. You breached them without effort, simply by being yourself. And when I learned the breach had help, I retreated behind them again. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew the small velvet box she knew so well. Opening it, he revealed the miniature suspension bridge, returned to him, perhaps, and now offered back. I asked for this when I was ready, he said softly. I am ready now, not because doubt has vanished, but because certainty has grown in its place. What we have is worth the risk. Eleanor's voice trembled. And Victoria's scheme? He smiled faintly. A flawed beginning does not dictate an unworthy ending. Structures can be reinforced without being demolished. He rose, crossing the small distance between them, and knelt before her chair, formal yet utterly sincere. Eleanor Harrington, he said, taking her hand, I love you. Not in spite of how we began, but because of who you are within it. Your mind, your integrity, your courage in choosing honesty when it cost you dearly. I love the woman who debates low tolerances with me at dawn and silences a room with quiet wisdom. He opened his other hand, revealing a ring, sapphire surrounded by diamonds, catching the sunlight like captured sky. Will you marry me? Not as reparation for past mistakes, but as a promise for our future. One built on truth, trust, and the deepest respect. Will you allow me to spend my life proving that sometimes the most imperfect beginnings lead to the strongest foundations? Tears slipped down Eleanor's cheeks, but she was smiling, radiantly, unreservedly. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Alexander. With all my heart. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to draw her into his arms. Their kiss was gentle at first, tentative as though relearning each other, then deepening with weeks of pent-up longing and relief. When they parted, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. There is one more matter, he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Victoria's young artist. Eleanor laughed softly through happy tears. You will approve him? I already have, he admitted. After meeting Whitmore properly, without my sister's interference, I found him talented, earnest, and devoted to her. His Chicago commission is impressive. I've offered him oversight of the decorative ironwork on the new Hudson estate restoration. A trial of sorts, for responsibility and for family harmony. She touched his cheek. You are a good brother. And I intend to be a better husband, he murmured, kissing her again. Later, when her father joined them to offer congratulations, discreetly summoned by the butler, Alexander remained at her side, hand entwined with hers. As evening fell and he prepared to depart, he paused at the door. Tomorrow, he said, I will call properly, with Victoria and Julian if you approve. We begin anew. All of us. Eleanor squeezed his hand. I would like that very much. He left with a final lingering kiss in the shadowed hall, promise and beginning in one. Alone in the drawing room, Eleanor lifted her hand, watching the sapphire catch the lamplight. The ring felt right, solid, beautiful, earned. Their love had been tested by deception and doubt, nearly destroyed by honesty itself. Yet here it stood, stronger, truer, reinforced by trial. Like any great bridge, it had weathered storm and strain. And now it would carry them forward, into sunlight, into spring, into a future neither had dared imagine that snowy night in a stranger's carriage. 1 year later, April 1887. The Hudson River estate of the Langfords gleamed under a perfect spring sky, its restored stone facade bathed in golden afternoon light. The old iron foundry, once crumbling, now stood proudly adapted, historic beams reinforced with modern steel, vast windows flooding the space with sun, the whole transformed into a grand family home while preserving every original arch and buttress. In the sunlit nursery overlooking the river, Eleanor stood by a tall Gothic-style window, cradling their 3-month-old son, Theodore Alexander Langford, Theo for short, in her arms. The infant slept peacefully, tiny fist curled against her breast, dark hair already showing hints of his father's wave. Alexander approached from behind, wrapping his arms around them both, his chin resting lightly on her shoulder. "He has your nose," he murmured, voice warm with wonder. "And fortunately my patience." Eleanor laughed softly, careful not to wake the baby. "He has your everything else, especially the habit of furrowing his brow when displeased with his milk." Alexander pressed a kiss to her temple. "A discerning critic already. He'll design bridges that revolutionize the world." She turned her head to meet his gaze, gray eyes soft with the easy intimacy of marriage. "Or harbors. We mustn't limit his ambitions." A gentle knock sounded, and Victoria swept in, radiantly happy, her auburn curls escaping their pins, her figure elegantly rounded with the advanced stages of her own pregnancy. "Don't disturb them if they're sleeping," she whispered dramatically, then ruined the effect by hurrying forward to peer at her nephew. "Oh, look at him. Perfect. I'm going to spoil him outrageously." "You already have," Alexander said dryly, nodding toward the corner piled with painted wooden blocks, a silver rattle, and a miniature suspension bridge carved especially for tiny hands. Victoria grinned unrepentantly. "Aunt's privilege." She settled carefully into a cushioned chair, hand resting on her belly. "Julian sends his love. He's overseeing the final ironwork on the east wing. He insists the decorative scrolls must be historically accurate down to the last curl." Eleanor smiled. "He's done beautifully. The foundry hall feels like it's always been this way, old and new in perfect harmony." "Rather like all of us," Victoria said softly, eyes misting. "I still can't believe it sometimes. You and Alexander. Me and Julian. Everyone happy despite my disastrous attempts at orchestration." Alexander released Eleanor to pull a second chair closer for his sister. "We've forgiven you, after sufficient groveling and a solemn vow never to meddle again." "Which I've kept," Victoria protested. "Mostly." Eleanor laughed. "You suggested which flowers I should carry at the wedding." "That was aesthetic advice," Victoria insisted. "Entirely different." They shared easy laughter, the sound mingling with birdsong from the open window. Below, the river sparkled, a steamboat gliding past in the distance, a reminder of the shipping empire that now intertwined with Langford Steel through marriage and mutual ventures. Julian Whitmore appeared in the doorway moments later, paint-smudged and windswept, his artist's eye lighting at the sight of his wife. "There you are," he said fondly, crossing to kiss Victoria's forehead. "The physician said rest, not climbing stairs to admire infants." "I'm resting," she replied, leaning into him. "Admirably." He turned to Eleanor and Alexander, grinning. "The east wing is complete. The light in the great hall is extraordinary, perfect for future exhibitions or family gatherings, or whatever this house becomes next." Alexander clasped his brother-in-law's shoulder. "You've outdone yourself, Julian. The ironwork is both beautiful and strong, exactly what we hoped." Julian's eyes shone with quiet pride. "Thank you. For the commission. For the trust." The words carried deeper meaning. Alexander had not only approved the marriage but offered Julian meaningful work, overseeing decorative elements on multiple Langford projects. Proof of responsibility given and earned. Theo stirred in Eleanor's arms, letting out a small sound. Alexander took him gently, cradling his son with practiced ease. "Look, little one," he whispered. "Your aunt and uncle. They'll teach you mischief and artistry. Your mother will teach you integrity and clear thinking. And I," he smiled down at the baby, "I will teach you that even flawed beginnings can become something enduring, if built on truth." Eleanor's heart swelled as she watched them, her husband strong and tender, their son new and perfect, Victoria and Julian, glowing with anticipation of their own child. Later, as the sun dipped toward the hills and guests departed, Eleanor and Alexander stood alone on the wide terrace overlooking the river. Theo slept upstairs in the care of his nurse. The air carried the scent of lilacs from the newly planted gardens. "Do you ever regret it?" Alexander asked quietly, echoing a question he'd once posed in doubt. "The chaos of how we began?" Eleanor slipped her hand into his. "Never. Every misunderstanding, every moment of pain, it led us here. To this." He drew her close. "I was so afraid of vulnerability after losing my parents. I built walls of duty and caution. You walked straight through them, not with schemes but with honesty, even when it risked everything. And you let me," she whispered. "You chose trust when it would have been easier to walk away." He kissed her then, slow, deep, full of the certainty that came from trials overcome. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Eleanor Langford. Not for perfection but for truth. For choosing me, flaws, fears and all. And I love you, she replied. For seeing me, mind, heart and courage. For building something real with me. Below them, the river flowed steadily onward, carrying the past away, making room for the future. Their love had begun in a desperate leap into the wrong carriage on a snowy night. It had nearly ended in the wreckage of revealed deception. But through raw honesty, forgiveness, and unwavering choice, it had become something unbreakable. A family. A legacy. A life richer than either had dared dream. In the quiet evening light, with their son sleeping above and new life soon to join them, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty. Sometimes the most unlikely paths, chaotic, painful, imperfect, led to exactly the right destination. And theirs had led home. The end.